I immigrated to the United States from Russia a decade ago, but before that I worked as a truck driver. I often traveled the route known as M56, a road that had the harmless name of Stalin Route. But that was built with the sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of people who were prisoners in the gulags. They were people that the state had sentenced to death, and the government had no intention of them returning. Almost half of them did not survive. They died from the cold hunger and exhaustion to this day. Many drivers claim to have seen apparitions on the M56. When I ventured along the M56, I came to the Kolyma Highway, known as the Route of the Bones. It is not a metaphor when the prisoners of the gulags died building these roads. They could not be buried because the permafrost music hardened with the road and were literally hidden. The road contains the remains of tens of thousands of people. Calling the M56, or the Route of the Bones roads, is misleading. At least according to my last experience there in 2010. It is not a paved road, but a road covered with stones that intertwine on the Siberian earth, that turns to mud when it rains. The M56 goes into Siberia to the north, and still many fatalities occur on this road. It often washes out, and parts of it collapse. Big dust storms hit it, causing accidents and deaths, causing trucks and cars to lose control and crash into trees or go off the road, and my load was completely unsafe. I was transporting tons of beer in glass bottles in the back, some of which ended up shattered by the endless vibrations caused by the sharp rocks along the road, which also damaged my tires. I wore out more than 15 tires a month, sometimes up to 25. If a truck loaded with between 15 and 18 tons of beer suffered, a tire blowout could mean a fatal accident instantly along the M56. Thousands of discarded tires were visible on the sides of the road. As for beer, it was very popular among the inhabitants of northern Siberia. I think they drank it more than water. Beer was more preferred than vodka. Despite being in Russia, perhaps beer was cheaper than bottled water. In some places, such was the story of my encounter on the M56. It began before I was at the warehouse to load 15 tons of beer into my old second-hand Japanese truck. It began when I saw a man standing outside, staring at me. He had very dark eyes and a round face, like a Siberian, with rosy cheeks. He was wearing a fur jacket whose origin I could not identify. He seemed warm, with several layers of sweaters and pants. The hood of the fur jacket still had the face of the animal. Although deformed and crushed, I immediately recognized that it was made of bear skin. I got out of my truck, lit a cigarette, and I headed towards him, buttoning up my jacket and putting on a thick wool hat. The wind blew hard around me, throwing snow in every direction, even in my face. I cursed, trying to turn my head. The front door was right next to the strange man, and I had to go in. I thought I could start with the paperwork. Now, however, the man kept staring at me, even as I walked over. I was about to ask him if he had a problem when he started talking. "You're heading to Kolyma, the Route of the Bones." He asked if I should first take the M56 north. I replied, "That's my job. I travel here and there as long as most of the cargo doesn't break or fall off the truck. I can keep going. You shouldn't go alone. The Route of the Bones will break you. It will shatter you. Like it did the bones of those who built it. You won't survive this trip, my friend." I didn't just laugh, but I felt a chill run my sword. "Are you some kind of Siberian shaman?" I asked. He smiled but didn't say anything. "You're a fortune teller." Are you reading my future? I'm just telling you the truth. No more. No less. Many believed that they would survive the Bone Road. Most still rest there with their skulls eternally smiling under the wheels that pass over them. So what do you suggest I do? I'm not suggesting anything, but if you want to have any chance of surviving, I must come with you. I will travel with you to Magadan, to the end of the Bone Road, and then you will be free. You will have seen the true nature of the Bone Road, and maybe you will still be alive. I closed my eyes, wondering if I was with a madman or a drunk, but it seemed completely coherent and logical. I wondered if this wasn't the strangest hitchhiking tactic anyone had tried to take a step back. Feeling the cold, the smell of smoke from the other trucks entering the warehouse parking lot, mixed with the aroma of outskirt, the evergreen trees that surrounded us, teas of town, and what is your name? I asked, looking more closely at the fur on his jacket. It looked like a bear. It was too hot next to the heat of the warehouse to wear furs. Jacob in my town. They know me as Jacob the Seer. I held back, a slight smile. Jacob, I am Nickel. I am a truck driver. Why not? You asked me to take you. I want you to get ready, he said cryptically, and then he did not mention the subject any further. He simply stated that he would return when my load was ready. I smiled and shook his hand, but as I walked away, I felt his gaze fixed on my back. My skin crawled, and I wondered if I had made the right decision. I soon loaded the truck and prepared to leave the parking lot. I stopped in front of the door and tried to see Yakov, but the thick snow prevented me from seeing beyond a few meters in any direction. I shrugged. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The warm air from the truck began to warm my hands and feet. I took off my jacket and hat covered in snow. The smell of wet wool still reminds me of winter. Suddenly there was a knock on my window. I jumped and looked under the seat for my P-96 pistol that I always carried loaded and hidden in case there were thugs. But when I looked, I saw Yakov's round and serious face looking at me. I sighed and made a sign for him to turn around and get in. Since it was an old Japanese truck, the drivers and passengers were reversed with respect to what is usual in the United States or Russia. Although I continued driving on the right side of the road, Yakov was carrying a small leather bag with his few belongings. He sat down, looked at me, and sketched a slight smile. Let's go, we have a very long trip, and I was right, at least 72 hours to Jakut, where I would leave all the load of beer, and then a trip from Yakutsk to Magadan that could last another 5 days. After that I had to pick up another load in Magadan, a contract that I had already accepted. They were waiting for me there in 8 days, which meant I would have to drive about 17 or 18 hours a day to get there on time. I set off slowly with the wind howling and the snow quickly covering the windscreen as I made my way down the tarmac road towards the M56. Jacob began to tell me a story. I was also a driver on the M56. Once I had to transport a shipment of vodka to Jakut. It was summer. There was so much dust blowing on the road. I couldn't see more than a few meters in front of me. I was afraid to go off the road. The truck was starting to get dark, so I pulled over to the side of the road and fell asleep. I woke up to a knock at the door. I looked, but there was no one there. I wondered if it was a trick. Bandits have been known to assault truck drivers on these roads, and sometimes they even block the road with disabled vehicles to force the trucker to stop. Then they come out drunk and armed and steal whatever he is transporting. I nodded as I had heard many stories like that. I had an old Makarov pistol. It must have been from the time of Stalin himself. But I will tell you that the Makarov is a good pistol, as long as you clean it and take care of it. It lasts a long time. Just like the cheap and durable K-47. I took my Makarov and a flashlight and started shining it in the windows. The dust had decreased, and now I could see at least 9 or 10 meters in all directions. To my surprise, I saw people working in the middle of the night. But they had a strange, ethereal look. They were digging the road with their hands, using shovels and half-broken stones and old rusty wheelbarrows to move the earth. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was dreaming. I saw the IDs sewn into the back of their jackets, a series of numbers replacing the person's name, like they used to do in the gulags. I started the truck with the intention of getting out of there, and as soon as the engine made noise, everyone turned to look at me. They were wearing wool hats and jackets, thinly padded with holes in the losant. None of them were wearing gloves. They were shivering despite the heat. And then I noticed the terrible wounds they had. Many had bullet wounds to the head, while others had their arms or hands crushed. They all looked like skeletons, almost starved to death. They were all dead. They had to be. I moved forward, hoping they would move away, but they didn't. Very slowly, I approached one of the men in the group whose face had been shattered by a bullet wound turned into a mask of bone splinters and blood. He stared at me as I approached. I continued moving slowly and passed by him. When I was a few meters away, I turned around and saw that everyone had disappeared. We had entered the M56 and the whole truck was vibrating, horribly shaken by the loose earth and stones that made up the road. I looked at Yakov for a moment, wondering if he was kidding me. "You have never seen anything like this." "Well, yes, but not ghosts." I answered, "No ghosts of Stalinism or a pack of cigarettes, one," and lit it. Rolled down the window a little, the freezing wind began to whip the truck, giving me goosebumps. A wave of terror ran down my back. But for another reason, I didn't want to think about the story. And yet I told it anyway. It was winter. It was very cold. Now I was driving on the M56 and I found a car on the hard shoulder. It had the indicators on and the engine off. We never turn off engines here in winter because they don't start again in the cold weather. It's not -60 or -70 degrees with the wind chill. I knew instantly the driver was in trouble. I stopped the truck and got out. I examined the car and saw the windows shattered with shards of broken glass all over the seats, and the floor and the driver's seat looked covered in blood. But there was no driver. I checked the underside of the car and looked into the nearby woods, shining my torch on the trees. I called the driver, and I asked him if he was hurt. For a long moment, no one answered me, and then I heard him answer very weakly, but with each word clearly recognizable. "Please," he said, "I am hurt. Go into the forest and help me." The voice did not sound normal. At first I wondered if it was the voice of an injured man, but it had a low, sibilant tone, and I tried to think quickly and asked him a question. "Have you been in a car accident? What happened?" The voice came back after a few long seconds of silence, saying the same thing with the same intonation and rhythm as if it were a recording in the forest. "Please, I am hurt. Go into the forest and help me." At that moment I decided that I should leave immediately. There was something strange in the situation. I could not say exactly what it was, but my intuition told me that something was wrong. I turned around to leave, and on the other side of the road I saw, well, something. I am not sure what it was. It looked like a man, but without hair, with the skin stuck to the bone, and pale, completely discolored. It seemed to be dying, hungry, with bony knees and legs like thin white sticks. He was naked. No sexual organs, no eyebrows, no nose or ears. I wondered if he was human. Now remembering, I think he wasn't. His eyes were like bright orbs of pure darkness, huge pools of black that watched me without blinking. Then he opened his mouth, showing yellow and crooked teeth. "Please, I'm hurt," he said. Without changing his expression, it seemed like a recording, and I heard the same words behind me, coming from the forest. "Please," said another voice. Maybe just about 3 meters behind me. Because of the sound, I ran to my truck and heard footsteps behind me. At least 2 pairs, maybe more. I didn't look back. I ran for my life and slammed the door shut just as I closed it. A hand grabbed my leg. I screamed, trying again and again to close the door. I kept hitting the thin and elongated white hand that held me. In the end, he let me go. I started the truck and got out of there. When I looked back, I saw dozens black eyes watching me, blinking after telling our stories. I drove in silence for an hour, the monotony broken only by the soft patter of snow against the truck. I thought about turning on music, but decided not to. Jakov broke the silence after what seemed like an eternity. My grandfather died here on the M56. He died building it, sent to the gulags, because one of his neighbors held a grudge against him over a land dispute. His neighbor went to the secret police and told them my grandfather was hoarding food and that he had said that Stalin should be killed. Of course, none of that was true, but in those days an accusation like that was enough to get you condemned. I remember that at night, 2 men came in long black coats and hats, tilted to the left. They were barely talking. My grandfather opened the door. They said a few words, and then they left. I was in the kitchen with my grandmother, and when I came out, I only found the door open and night outside. I looked around expecting to see my grandfather smoking his pipe or sitting on the porch, but I never saw him again. We never got his body back, and I only knew he died because one of his fellow prisoners managed to survive. He lived in the same village as me, and when he came back after 5 years in the gulag, he told me that my grandfather would never come back. He told me that my grandfather had left him a message for me, that he loved me, that he would always be with me, and that I should be strong. I cried for a long time. The man from the village said that my grandfather had fainted one day while working in the winter, that his body could no longer stand the constant sub-zero temperatures and hunger. The guard came up, shot him in the head, and then they continued building the road, throwing dirt and stone over his body. Soon the locals said they buried him under the road next to a dozen other corpses that had died that day during work. I think that maybe that is why the spirits called me here. I never wanted to work as a driver on this road, but it is the only one that leads north to Yakutsk, and I had few job options. However, knowing that I drove over my grandfather's body every time I drove, the truck made me want to, I don't know, get revenge or even destroy the road. I just don't know. It stopped. My heart raced. I wondered how much he knew about me. Interestingly, my grandfather had also been in the gulags, but not as a prisoner. He had watched them and probably shot them and tortured them like all the guards in that terrible place. I never knew my grandfather, and he died of a heart attack. before I was born, and yet we shared the same last name. And my parents even said that I looked like him, with the gray eyes, the high cheekbones, and the thick wavy black hair. I had a thin angular face, and a thin muscular body just like him. They told me that we could have been twins. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my own face, and my grandfather's like another face that I saw headlights coming up behind us. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was another driver going to deliver goods, but they were coming too fast for the conditions with the snow, the rocks, and the unstable nature of the road. I felt a sense of unease at the dangerous one. The driver was approaching. I quickly changed the subject. I didn't want to talk about my family's past. I think they're following us, I said. Jacob turned his head. His eyes went wide as he looked at the lights coming up behind us. "They're going too fast," he said, and then I saw it in front of us. There was a wrecked car, a pile of rusty metal. No windows. The front of the driver was destroyed, as if he had hit a tree or a large rock. The snow had already filled the interior, covering the seats and upholstery, and I barely saw it. In time, I immediately started to slow down, knowing that a truck loaded with so much weight would take much longer than a normal car to stop. "Someone has dragged this here." I said, "I think it is an ambush, just saying." Those words took my breath away. I quickly tried to calculate our options. I was thankful to have Yakov and that he was armed. I reached under my seat and pulled out my pistol. 96, you have a gun." Jacob, the headlights behind us, had already gone from small points of light to dull orbs like the moon in the snow. I slowed the truck quickly, so as not to hit the car, blocking the road, trying to stay moving, so as not to go off the road. Yakov quickly unzipped his bulging backpack and reached in for something, frowning, then smiled. He raised his hand and showed his pistol. "Makarov." "I thought you said you had a new Makarov." I said, "Okay, never mind." I looked at it closer. It was one of the oldest pistols I had seen outside of a museum or collection. The macaroon was kind of pointy near the barrel and tapered in a curve at the end. It had a wooden grip, very worn from use over decades, and the metal had darkened with time. But overall, it still looked like a valuable weapon and certainly an antique. I wondered if this 70 or 80-year-old gun would still fire. I hoped for our sake it would. The lights were almost reaching us, and I had managed to stop the truck about 10 meters from the car, blocked in the road. It was as far as I could go. Given the conditions, I wanted room to back up or turn around, or to speed up and run over the bandits. If it were necessary, I could probably push the car out of the way, if it was a matter of life or death. At least that's what I hoped at that moment. Looking back, all these years later, I realized how naive I was. Then I saw some men coming out of the forest, hooded and dressed in black from head to toe. They all carried weapons. The truck behind me stopped. I saw it was a very old rusty Toyota pickup. It had 3 sets of tires, 2 in the back, 1 double. It looked modified like many cars in Russia, however, with 6 tires and no load to carry, could move along the M56 at a speed greater than mine, certainly could not outrun him, unless I shot out one of his tires and slowed him down enough to find help. This area was deserted, but there were small villages of nomads or natives in the region. 4 men got out of the truck, each with a rifle. We were at a disadvantage. I wondered if we would die. I doubted it, but what did I know about bandits? Perhaps our bones would join those of the hundreds of thousands of people who had died here. Perhaps they would also become part of the road get out. The man in front shouted, covered with a balaclava, though only I could see his eyes. But he seemed undull and unfocused. His gaze drifted from us to the forest, then around the area, then back to me. I wondered if they were all drunk. It was very likely if they were. It would be easier to confront them. I looked at Yakov, who was sitting in his seat, shaking slightly with the gun in his hand. He looked at me, and I could see the fear reflected in his eyes. Should we fight? He asked, desperate. I had no idea this had never happened to me. I had heard stories, but get out now, or we shoot. The man yelled at us, breaking my thoughts. Yes, we must fight him anyway. He will kill us if we get out. At least if we fight, we can decide our fate. These men are probably drunk and not very accurate with their weapons. We could have an advantage. I looked at the man in front of me and saw how he raised the gun and aimed at me. I crouched down, and a minute later a bullet went through the driver's door. The thud of the bullet broke the dull sound of the dentist. I felt like the cold air. I got into the car through the hole. I rolled down the window, still crouching in the seat, begging God for help. I saw Yakov crouching too. I sat up quickly, aiming and shooting at the man in front. He was standing with the gun pointing down, talking to the other men. The shot hit him in the chest, and he fell screaming. I saw blood splatters on the white snow surrounding him, little red spots on an eternally white landscape. Firing a gun in such a small space left my ears ringing, and for a moment I couldn't hear anything. I saw the rest of the men had gathered in a circle when I fired, both those in the forest and those in the truck, so it would be easier to take them all out. One by one, that is. I counted 7 more men we would have to kill or neutralize. But I hoped if I killed a few, the rest would run away. They wanted easy targets and quick money. No gunmen to return the gunfire. They all raised their guns to fire at the truck, curse him. When suddenly there was a long silence. I looked up, and everyone was looking towards the forest, as if something else had caught their attention, with their guns still pointed at him. They didn't even try to pick up the body of their fallen comrade. They ran for their lives, as if they knew exactly what it was. However, I had no idea. I thought some strange Siberian animal would come out of the forest, some species I had never seen before, but that seemed a lot better than a group of armed men. Oh, thank God, I said, let's go. Now we just have to push this car off the road, and we can get out of here. Yakov nodded, still nervous, still holding his gun tightly. What do you think that was? I shrugged without giving it much importance. Probably some animal. I said these people around here are superstitious. Now help me move that car so we can get out of here as soon as possible. I said we did, and we set off. Night fell heavily on the road of bones as Jacob and I ran away from that terrifying experience we had been able to survive. But a silence reigned in the cabin. I wondered what it was that made them flee. With my heart pounding in my chest, we accelerated along the icy road. However, our escape was abruptly interrupted when the truck began to fail. The engine suddenly shut off, leaving us at the mercy of the night. Damn. I said I forgot to add the antifreeze additive in the fuel tank. It must be freezing. I will have to go down to do it. It will take me a minute. Wait here. I opened the door of the truck, and a freezing wind hit my face, almost like a slap. The night outside was relentless. The cold seemed to bite the skin, penetrating even through the thick jacket I was wearing. The wind howled through the trees, dragging with it a constant whisper that put my nerves on edge. I reached the side of the truck with my hands numb and trembling. As I took out the bottle of additive, I unscrewed the cap of the fuel tank, and with difficulty I poured the liquid inside, hoping it would be enough to defrost the engine and get us out of that frozen hell. Suddenly the wind seemed to change direction, and in the middle of its howl I heard something. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but there it was, again, clearer, closer. A voice I froze, not because of the cold, but because of fear. The dark forest seemed to watch me, and the voice, now clearer, repeated, "Help me, please." I stood still with the empty bottle still in my hand. My breathing became visible in the freezing air. There was no doubt the voice came from the forest, and now I could hear it, clearly, "Please help me. I am hurt." I looked towards the thicket of trees, where the darkness was almost total, barely broken by the reflection of the snow that covered the ground. I felt a shiver run down my back, not only because of the cold, but because of the disturbing certainty that no one could have survived in those conditions alone. In the middle of the snowfall, I felt panic begin to take hold of me. I turned on my heels and ran back to the truck, sliding on the ice as the wind seemed to push me in the opposite direction. I jumped in and slammed the door hard, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. "What happened?" asked Yakov, his voice trembling. "I don't know. There's something in the woods, but I'm not staying to find out." I answered in a harsher tone than I intended. I turned the key in the ignition, praying for the engine to respond for a moment. Everything seemed to freeze around me, and then the engine roared with life, as if it shared my urgency to get away from there without wasting a second. I stepped on the accelerator, and the truck launched forward, skidding slightly on the icy road before stabilizing as it increased speed. I glanced at the ESP rearview mirror. The darkness of the forest was falling behind, but the feeling that something had been watching us persisted. The wind kept whispering, but now it seemed far away, drowned out by the noise of the engine.